We're switching things up a little bit in the show today. I'm going to go right to our interview because we have a wonderful guest online, Jim Ryun. And if you're thinking, I know that name, I'll remind you very quickly. He was the person who broke the 4-minute mile barrier standard. Pretty amazing tribute by itself. He also is a fabulous Olympian athlete. He also served as a member of Congress for 10 years. And I want to just read you something he wrote about his life. He's just a stellar American. He and his wife are the parents of 4 children. With his sons, he wrote 2 different political books, which we're going to talk about. But I first want to just read you a little clip about him because he was in fact, my husband commented this morning, he remembered seeing the Sports Illustrated cover and seeing Breaking the 4-Minute Mile and Jim Ryun thinking, oh my gosh, this is like the coolest thing ever. So we have him on the phone, but first I want to just tell you one thing to introduce him that he wrote about himself in describing his moving forward in running in high school. I couldn't do anything else. When you're cut from the church baseball team, the junior high basketball team, and you can't make the junior high track and field team, I'd go to bed at night and I'd say, dear God, if you've got a plan for my life, I'd appreciate if you'd show up sooner or later because it's really not going very well. I found myself trying out for the cross-country team and running 2 miles, even though I'd never run that distance before. All of a sudden, I made the team, I got a leather jacket, and I started thinking, there's a girlfriend behind the leather jacket. But that's how it all began. So that is a quote from Jim Ryun, our guest joining us today. And we have him on the phone. But I want to start asking Matt the Wonderful to put up his picture. You can see who this famous American is. And welcome to America Can We Talk, Jim Ryun.
It'd be nice to be on with you. As you told that story, I was able to share that particular prayer and some of those comments at the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and it's really true. It all began with a simple prayer.
Okay, well, that was my next issue to go to, but let's go ahead and do that first. So very recently this year, Jim Ryun was awarded the Medal of Freedom by President Trump, and Matt the Wonderful has a picture of that. I have that sent to him, just him getting that award, which is just, did you just not love that picture? Love both. Of course, we know we love President Trump. Love Jim Ryun, that look of gratitude and pride and smiling. So tell us a little bit about just getting the Medal of Freedom. There aren't that many Americans who did that. How did that whole process go? Did you find out months ahead? A week ahead? How did you find out you were going to be awarded the Medal of Freedom?
Late last year, our son, who has a very good relationship with the president, in fact, the president calls Ned on different occasions, when he makes comments on some of the networks, primarily with Fox. And they're not always favorable. Ned is one of those guys who, our son is so, how do I say this, he reads the bills, he understands what's in there, and if he disagrees with the president, he'll say something, but more often than not, he agrees with him, and he supports the president. Let me make sure you get that out of there. So in the process of conversation, he went in to meet with the president, and the president said, let's see, wait a minute, last name is R-Y-U-N. Wait a minute, is your dad Jim? And Ned said yes. He said, oh, my gosh, I love your father. He said, I want to give him, over the course of a couple conversations, I want to give him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So that came up late last year, and I think they were going to try and do something in March. In February, we finally got an official notice from the president through our son, Ned. He surprised us over a meal at his house. Said, Dad, here's something the president wants to do. And then along came COVID, so it had to be put off until July 24th. So it was a tremendous honor. In fact, our youngest daughter, Catherine, kind of captured the moment a little bit. She said, Dad, as we were gathering, getting ready, she said, this is pretty special. You get to do this while you're alive. Some people don't. So it was a great honor.
It certainly was. And actually, I will tell our listeners, it's through a mutual friend, a friend of ours in Dallas, who's also a friend with the Ryun family, who made this connection for me. I'm very grateful for that. Grateful for this opportunity to talk with you. Really just an American held in the highest esteem by many, many people. And since you're talking about your sons, let's jump into that for a moment. So you have I know you have 2 daughters, 2 sons. Your 2 sons are Ned and Drew, and they're both very politically active. And I'd love to have you tell them, our listeners, a little bit about they founded, I don't know if they both founded or they worked together, but the American Majority. Is that the name of their group?
That's actually the group that Ned does, and that's basically an organization that trains individuals to help candidates run for office. So knowing from my experience in running for office, which was the first time, go get 'em type thing, way back in 1996, he recognized that what we needed were good workers, but a lot of the workers don't know what to do or what to expect, and so that's what American Majority is about. And along with that, he's had thousands of trainees, and so he still trains people. They can go to AmericanMajority.org and find out how they can help, which I would encourage people to do, because this is one of those critical, pivotal years of an election that will decide a lot of the future. But AmericanMajority.org does train individuals to run, the staff to help individuals run for office. And I also work with Ned on a program called Madison Project. We help identify full spectrum conservatives running for either the Senate or the House. And we work with the president and the campaign, and he's excited about the candidates we have, so they can go to MadisonProject.com and learn more from that.
I just love that. I love all the things that your family does. And I'm going to jump around a little bit, but you and your family. In fact, we have a picture of your family. Maybe Matt, look at that big family, that big, beautiful American family. So you and your wife have 2 boys, 2 girls, and a lot of grandchildren there. It's a beautiful family. I love that. So I want our guests to see that. But I want to ask you, how did you, in this era where many people are lamenting that their adult children don't seem to have embraced the values of pro-America, faith, their Christian faith, their pro-American values, that somehow as our country has seemingly become more secular, we have more students going through high school and college getting kind of sabotaged as compared with what they were taught in their homes. So you managed to have your sons emerge so conservative and so active. So I'm sure our listeners would love to know how you managed to do that.
By the grace of God, to be honest with you, Debbie, my wife Ann and I, 2 things that I would offer this for your listeners: intentional parenting, and then living your life in front of your children. And by intentional parenting, I mean this: that as little children, and then as they grew up until they left high school, actually we still do it as adults when we're together, we have morning devotions, and those morning devotions can be something as simple as Daily Bread, which you can get for on your phone as an app, or like this morning I shared with the family, actually just Ann and Catherine are around. I have a devotional that I do in the morning. Part of it is from a book, Then Sings My Soul. And so I happen to focus on the hymn Revive Us Again, written by William P. McKay. And so I share with them, some of the principles that came out of it. This man who became a doctor, and his mom kept praying that he would have salvation. And it wasn't until late in his life, after he'd gone through a number of different things as a doctor, he was treating a man who was going to die, and the man wanted his Bible, and so they brought his Bible in, and he died. And the story goes on that at the end, when his belongings were being separated, the doctor happened to ask about the book, which was the Bible that the man relied upon. And so he opened it up, and he found out it was a Bible his mother had given him intentionally as a young boy, and his name was in it. And so it was one of those moments of conversion. So just sharing things like that in devotions. We used to do, part of our devotions, hiding place. But intentional parenting is a big part of that. And then a second part, I mentioned, making sure you live your life in front of your children. We're very pro-life. In fact, going back to Madison Project, full spectrum conservatives mean that they are pro-government, pro-small government, pro-lower taxes, strong military, and they're pro-life. And so living that in front of our children, we actually took them to the pro-life march in Washington, D.C. In January a couple of times, so that they would be living, that aspect of our lives together. So intentional parenting, and then living your life in front of your children so that they see what you really stand for.
Those are beautiful answers. And I must tell you, actually taking your children to pro-life march, it does help kids, especially if you're in a smaller community and your parents teach you things at home, and you may get the impression, well, this is just my parents who think this way, or my parents in my church, or our little community. But when you go to that beautiful pro-life march in Washington and you see not just the large crowds, but the excitement and the happiness and it's filled with love of life. And I think that whole tone emanates throughout that event. So that was a great idea. Great idea.
Well, and I would say making sure that you pray a lot, because, no I mean, circumstances change, and you're imperfect. Ann and I would say we were imperfect parents. We really were. And by the grace of God, our children turned out not only walking with the Lord, but the conservatives. In fact, I remember, it's sort of a funny story, when we ran for office the first time, we knew we'd helped others run, so it wasn't like it was brand new to us. We'd gone door to door. And so once the decision was made, I heard something out in the garage. It was our oldest daughter, Heather. She'd gone out and gotten a 4x6 piece of plywood, was writing on there, Ryun for Congress. And we lived in the country, so she called it out, stuck it in the ground out in front of our place in the country, and was ready to go. So, living your life in front of them so that they could participate as well. And it was very much a family effort in 1996 when we ran for Congress the first time.
Jim Ryun, it's a beautiful story and great advice for parenting. I do want to turn to your time in Congress. You served in the United States Congress representing the 2nd District of Kansas for 10 years, 1996 to basically January of 2007. And today, in 2020, people talk about how divided America is. Across the country, there seems to be such a toxic political environment in this country. And in Congress, you have people in Congress who simply, the two parties, at least as they're out facing to the media, they don't get along, they don't agree on anything. There's a very difficult time getting very much done. So what do you think accounts for, or do you think is how it is today very different than it was when you served in Congress ending in 2007, so 13 years ago? Was it always like this, or has it gotten worse?
No, I think it's always been like this, Debbie. It's just that we have a 24-hour news cycle, and people are much more aware of things than ever before. Let me give you a little example of the partisanship that goes on. This is an actual story that took place. I was serving on both the Armed Services Committee, and just down the hall was the Financial Services Committee. And I just finished a vote on the Armed Services Committee. I was walking into the Financial Services Committee for a vote, which, your staff is there listening so that when it becomes your turn, you can respond knowing what the issue is, where you stand on that particular amendment or whatever. And so we walked into the room in Financial Services, and I turned to my staffer that was there. First of all, you turn to the person who's recording the vote, and you say, "Madam Chair, how am I recorded?" Well, you're not recorded. That's so you can stall just a little bit and turn to your staffer and say, "What am I on this vote?" And in this case, you said you were a yes. So I said, "Madam Chair, put me down for a yes." So right behind me came someone in opposite position entirely, Barney Frank. And so, he walked in and he said, "Madam Chair, not how am I recorded, how is Congressman Ryun recorded?" She said, "Well, he's a yes." And he said, "Well, put me down as a no." So,
oh my gosh.
This has been going on forever, but I think now with the 24-hour news cycle, you have much more attention being drawn to it. And in some respects, that's good, because I think more people are tuning in instead of accepting the, whatever the major news networks are putting out there. And I attribute a lot of that to the president, who has drawn attention to the fact that there's a lot of fake news out there.
Oh, his fake news commentary, I know, is very, very upsetting to the fake news, because they have been, whether you like the term fake news or not, we have developed advocacy journalism. I would argue far more than there was at least 30 years ago compared with now. I think that the concept of journalism to report and let people hear both sides, it's not found in very many places. So at least that's how I see it. But I want to talk to you. You and your sons wrote some books. I love that too. What is just a signal or sign of the wonderful relationship you have with your sons. So you and your sons, Ned Ryun and Drew Ryun, co-authored 3 books: Heroes Among Us, The Courage to Run, and In Quest of Gold, The Jim Ryun Story. So first of all, I love that you did that. And tell us about the first one I mentioned, Heroes Among Us. What did you write about in that book?
The inspiration on that one came because it was during a time in the early 2000s when you had famous athletes identifying themselves as heroes, and I became annoyed with that, as did our sons, in that they're not heroes, they're well-paid athletes. And so we began doing some research, and they did the lion's share of the research, and they would go into the Library of Congress. As a member of Congress, they had access to all kinds of books, and so they would check them out. I would get them for them, and they'd read the stories, and that became the genesis of Heroes Among Us. We wanted to tell the story of individuals who had made sacrifices for our country that really contributed to the betterment of our country. So Heroes Among Us was written, in the early 2000s, again, wanting to shine the light on the real heroes and what they had done. Courage to Run was a 60-day devotional that we put together, which highlighted a number of things in my life, which we had a chance to reflect on, and bringing in scripture, again, 60 days, 60 different devotions, with the intent of just trying to share some personal stories and identify with scripture in a way that might make it more real. And actually, in Quest of Gold was written not with our sons, but with another man, but we're going to reprint it here within the next 30 days because it's one that's very popular and people are interested in. So, they'll be able to find that one not before too long here.
I love that, and I'm sorry, I thought all three were by you, with you and your two sons. And so your sons, I know the one who's running, is it Ned Ryan who's running American Majority? Which one is?
That's correct.
Okay, yeah. I love that they're so active, and honestly, that is such a particularly relevant mission, and the Madison Project, both of them. They're just, they're people trying to strive to preserve America. So you, yeah, do you want to say? Okay.
No, I'm agreeing with you, and I think that's something, that we should not take for granted, especially in this election cycle. And let me just say this. I watched a little of the Democrat convention, very little, but I walk away from that with a very down feeling about what's going on in the country. And I'm watching parts of the Republican National Committee, the convention, and the contrast is enormous. Let me say, as an athlete, when Coach Timmons, I ran under 4 minutes in high school, which at the time had never been done. And so Coach Timmons presented that goal to me, saying, I think you can be the first high school boy to run under 4 minutes. So that's one train of thought going on, being presented to me. And on the other side, I was listening to people who were, sports enthusiasts and runners, and they said, well, no high school boys ever run under 4 minutes. What makes you think you can do that? And so the difference in the motivation was Coach Timmons presented a plan. He had a goal to achieve, and while it was his goal, I eventually adopted it, but I believed in what he could do. And that, to me, is the enormous contrast between the Democrat convention and Republican convention. We have trials in this country, policies that need to be put in the right place, and there is a bright future, but nothing is ever done in easy fashion. And running in 4 minutes in high school wasn't easy, but it was a challenge, and I think that's what people respond to. Challenge with optimism that there is a chance we can turn this country around, and I think we will with President Trump being reelected.
I think we will too, and I do want to get on to that topic. In fact, that's the next thing I'm going to go to after we finish speaking today. But my sense, it's an interesting to use the words you did in describing it, because the Democrat convention, I didn't watch all of it, but I did watch quite a bit, and not live. I watched it later, but there was just a darkness, a negativity about the idea of America, about the character of America, it just paints a picture of America as a really bad place full of all sorts of moral flaws and weaknesses. No country's perfect, no person is perfect, but the very character of America seemed, through the Democrat convention, we painted very dark, very negative, and that we're just kind of struggling in enormously terrible times. In contrast with what you're hearing in the Republican National Convention, there's just a sense of America's goodness and the goodness of the American people. And I love your point, too, about a plan. You hear President Trump, he has his new thing. I think it's 49 points in 10 subject areas. They're very specific things he's identified. We're going to shoot for this and then this and then this. And they all have an underlying assumption that America can be good and be strong and get better and grow and continue to thrive. So I'm glad you had that observation too. So, is your sense that I love that you have that sense about the RNC. How do you feel, are the Republicans, you think, going to be able to pull together in this election cycle and get us over the finish line? What's your sense about how things are going?
I think the ones that really believe in America will. Let me go back to something you asked earlier, and that is, has Congress become more contentious, fighting and going on now more than ever before? It's always been there. I can say that from when I served in Congress. It's just now that people are starting to see that. And so the solutions most Democrats offer are based on emotion. They're not based on reality, and they're not based on sound financial direction. And so that's what's happening now. We're really seeing a lot of the difference between the two conventions, I see, is that the Democrat convention is focus on all these problems, but they always focus on problems, but they don't have solutions. They deal with your emotions. Whereas I see on the Republican side, the Republican National Convention, they have ideas. Are all of them perfect? No. Are all of them going to work? No, but at least they're going in the right direction, and there's hope in that. And that four-letter word is so critical for this election November 3rd and for what's coming up. We have to have hope. We have to believe in America, and by the grace of God, I think we'll be able to get there again.
I do too, sir. I actually feel very optimistic about this election cycle, and I do think even though there is toxicity in the American, in the media, and the portrayal of America, I do think that many of the challenges we're facing, both with COVID and with the riots and protests in the cities, it is causing a lot of Americans to think about what kind of a country we are, what kind of a country do we want to be, how much we value freedom, how much we want to work harder toward a better and greater America. And I think it's helping people feel inspired almost, even though obviously we don't wish we were ever had to go through the challenges we're going through. But I think it's causing rethinking in America. Do you see that too?
Well, I do, and I think one of the things that's happened very unfortunately is that we see people who are afraid to really express their opinion because they're afraid of the consequences, and yet they're very committed to, let's say, for example, they're afraid to say they're going to support Trump because they're afraid of the consequences that go with it. In fact, I saw a polling not too long ago that I think there's as many as 60% or 60% of a number that's very large that are afraid to express their opinion because they're fearful of the consequences. Let me give you a personal example. It was during the McCain run for office. We live not far from the Capitol, and so one evening when I was serving in Congress, I'd gone back home. I was working in the district. It was late at night, and there was a knock at the door and a ring at the doorbell, and my wife went down, and there stood several policemen, several firemen. What had happened is someone had set the sign, the McCain for President sign, on fire. And so all of a sudden, as it happens in D.C., you get several fire trucks and the police coming in. I knew I was a congressman, so they want to make sure everything was okay. That's why people are a little bit afraid to express themselves, because they're not sure that if they do, they might not find a brick through the window. Again, burning down the presidential sign in our front yard was an indication of just a hostility to be there, which, we've always been able to express ourselves as a country, but we've become so hostile in terms of how we view somebody else. It's very unfortunate that people are afraid to express their opinions.
I agree. Actually, in this election cycle, I will tell you, we live in Texas, Dallas, Texas, where people around the country think, oh, Texas is so conservative. Dallas isn't so conservative, and there are plenty of people who won't put up a Trump sign in their yard. I know them. I know they're going to vote for him, but they're not about to do that. They fear not just strangers driving by, but they fear their neighbors. So it's a very challenging thing and a very unhealthy thing. It's one of the things I talk about a lot in the show.
It really is.
Yeah. The idea of America, you're supposed to be able to have the robust debate of ideas, have a conversation without ad hominem attacks, without getting personal, just to say, I believe in X and not Y. Why do you think that? But, it goes back to your point about the arguments made by the left. Because they're based on emotion, there isn't a logical response. You never have a logical connection to even discuss whatever the issue is that you disagree about.
So let me give you another example. This is one of the reasons that the media is frowned upon so often, and why the president calls it fake media. If you recall, in 2000, there was this little issue called Y2K, and with the world stop and fall apart January 1, 2000. And so in advance of that, I had the chairman of the Y2K committee come into my major city, Topeka, Kansas, which is also the capital of Kansas. And so prior to that, I had arranged with the newspaper, my office put an ad in the paper advertising that the chairman of the Y2K committee, which is very special to have him come, would come into Topeka. He went to the largest room we could rent at that point, which was the Supreme Court office, or Supreme Court area of the Capitol in Topeka, at the Capitol. And so we arranged, we had a tremendous turnout, great attendance. Actually, people standing in the hallway wanted to hear what the chairman had to say. And towards the end of it, this young woman stood up and said, Congressman, I work at the newspaper. She said, I'm the person who received your call advertising for the Y2K seminar here, find out more about it. I don't see anybody here from the newspaper, or nobody here from any of the news services. And so that's a part of what we struggle with as conservatives, is getting the attention of the media, where they'll come and listen because you're considered a conservative and they don't really want to know what you're doing. And so that was a struggle I went through. And it's not unlike what President Trump is going through. The fake media has an agenda. It should be journalism. I graduated in photojournalism. It's supposed to record the facts, not your opinion. That's supposed to be for the opinion page.
Jim Ryan, you are a national treasure. As I say, my husband was excited to hear we were going to have this interview today. So we've been speaking with Jim Ryan. He is an author, as you heard a moment ago, an Olympic track star, the breaker of the 4-minute mile. I was going to make a joke, but I couldn't run a quarter mile in 4 minutes. But, you know, I do other I do other things well, but I couldn't do that. And served in the
I'm not sure I could do that anymore either.
Okay, fair enough. Yep. And served in the U.S. Congress for 10 years, but really known as just a widely loved American figure, a hero of sports. And actually, I meant to mention, participated in the 1964, 1968, and 1972 Summer Olympics. So still remains the youngest American male track athlete to ever qualify for the Olympics. Jim Ryan, I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today.
Happy to do it, Georgia. We'll do it. Debbie, we'll do it again sometime, all right?
Absolutely. I would love it. Thank you so much, Mr. Ryan. Thank you.